welcome to our next edition of the Sleepy Eight podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Gervais, Métis Nation of Alberta members, and very proud to say that I'm Métis. I know I haven't made too many mistakes. I think Devin would probably point that out. We do have a no-show today, so that gives me an opportunity to talk about Métis stuff. And I've sort of thought, well, my brain, if nobody shows, well then, yeah, we can have Devin ask me questions about what are Métis stuff, and hopefully people will, look at it and listen to what I have to say. My knowledge goes back many years, and I think my real education didn't really start till 2014 when I got in this role, and so very excited to talk about Métis stuff. So, Devin, what is the first question?
All right. Let's start off with what is the Métis homeland?
Oh, yeah, that's a very interesting question that you ask. Métis homeland is the term they use for like the Métis footprint in the Western Territories. So it's not like this is our conquered land type thing. It's not meant to be like that. Métis homeland just means that this is where we lived and we traveled around. We did it goes all the way back to the fur trade, but predominantly around when the scrip commissions were coming in to make us apply for those homesteads, and in Canada instilled that scrip application process. So I do believe there's about 3 different scrip commissions that we base that homeland map on. So it goes from northern BC through Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and a sliver on the west side of Ontario, and then in the Northwest Territories, and in the south across the U.S. border into Montana and North Dakota and all those places. But that's where they kind of predominantly were. Métis kind of did their applications, so then we kind of knew, in Canada acknowledged that these homesteads were there. So it's a pretty important concept because, and it's not a concept, it's what we negotiate with Canada currently, and what they recognize as the Métis footprint. So we don't go too much in southern BC or too far in the eastern Ontario, but we are recognized across Canada, at least in 5 provinces, right? So,
yeah, that's a big area. What is scrip?
Well, scrip, like I said, was the colonial term, I would say, that Canada had made, and they would put these commissions together to kind of make us reapply for those lands we were currently on for generations. And there are lawyers out there that call it the largest land swindle in North America, and they're not wrong. It basically was a process set up by Canada to extinguish land title away from the Métis. So then we were landless after that for many years. So from 1885 to about 1970, the only place that we could really reside is on Crown land, which is the road allowance. So that 25-meter area between the road and the fence line, that was the only areas that we could reside in. So they made that scrip process to extinguish a land title and then place us in those areas and not on reserves, because that was basically a system for First Nations and how they basically extinguished their land and put them on these reservations, right?
Okay.
So when you hear scrip, it's not with a T, it's just one P. And it's actually mentioned in our Métis Nation Accord. So now when we do negotiations with Canada, we do have to talk about scrip and what that means to us. Whether there's land coming back, that's really not to be determined now, but certainly in the future, who knows? Because that will take a long time to really settle.
Yeah, I've been saying it wrong this whole time, so I learned something new today. And next question, who is Cuthbert Grant?
Oh, He is the founder of Nouvelle Nation, so the first aspects of us as Métis people being sovereign, that we govern ourselves and we set up our own government. So he predates even Louis Riel by a number of years, I think about 50 years, right? His activism in the Red River. And what had happened with Cuthbert Grant was there was Selkirk settlers moving into the Red River in 1816. So they call it the Battle of Seven Oaks. We call it the Victory of Frog Plain. But there were significant steps for the Métis to say, no, we don't want encroachment. We just burned down some of these forts because of the pemmican trade, and now we're moving into these settlers and colonizers are coming in, so we're going to fight. And Cuthbert Grant was the leader at that time, declared this to be the new nation, and he was saying the new Métis nation. And that's when we rose our flag, the Infinity flag, was in 1816. So during that battle, we actually reference our Métis flag as a battle flag. It's not, something we take lightly. It was us to say, yes, we are sovereign. We are real, true Otipimisuak and all those things. And he was convicted, put on trial, and during his trial went to Montreal, so a lot of those individuals who participated and had shot at those Selkirk settlers, and then he was exonerated in, I think it was 1821, and that's when he was gifted the area of White Horse Plain or St. Francois Xavier, which is about 32 kilometers west of Winnipeg, and he set up his own, I would say, Buffalo Nation, and he had his own granary and had produced wheat, and he was getting into agriculture. They called him the Warden of the Plain. He just developed into this politician, and we call him like the original leader of the Métis Nation.
Interesting. He really paved the way then.
Yeah.
What years was Louis Riel then kind of coming out?
Well, Louis Riel Sr. certainly probably was witness to a lot of Cuthbert Grant's government. But Louis Riel Sr. was a French patriot, and he even went to Quebec. And then when Louis Riel was born, kind of gave him those ideals, like of that English versus French thing, and really took that side of the French. I do believe he was a witness in the Papillon Rebellion in Quebec, and even brought the battle flag to the Red River when it was illegal, and really put activism into Louis Riel. And then when Louis Riel was a lawyer and educated in Quebec, came back through the Catholic system, was a lawyer, when those sort of speculators came in, no, not speculators, the ones who mapped the land, I don't know what they're called, but anyways, they went into the Red River without permission. And he stood on the chains and said, no, you cannot be here. You don't have any legal right. And challenged Canada, and he wasn't wrong. And that upset a lot of, that went all the way to Ottawa right away, and upset all of them, right? Including John A. Macdonald. So then they wanted to negotiate with Louis Riel fair terms, and then, of course, Riel had shot one of the Orange men, or one of the supporters of government, and they looked at him as somebody who was against Canada. We need to get rid of the Métis, and that's what sparked that activism from Louis Riel. So that was probably he set up his government in 1867, so when Canada was certainly born, but 1870 was the first Métis dispersal, where their army moved into the Red River, and all the Métis left, right? So.
And sorry, you said the flag, it was illegal to?
The Papillon Rebellion flag, yeah. So it was a French supportive flag. Okay. Because it was English versus French on the Plains of Abraham in Montreal, like their own civil war.
Yeah.
French versus English. But Louis Riel Sr. was an activist on the French side. So when Louis Riel was setting up his provisional government, Manitoba, and they signed the Manitoba Act and instilled all these Métis rights, he made half English and half French. and that upset a lot of the leaders in Ontario because they felt, well, he's supporting the French, and we support the English,
Yeah.
and we're Protestants and they're Catholic, and it started this whole race war.
Large division.
But a lot of people assume it's because the Métis were standing up. There was more meaning to that rebellion than people think, or Canadians think. It was predominantly, he was a French supporter and viewed as that in Ontario.
Interesting. And what is the Red River cart?
God, these questions jump around everywhere. Red River cart it's actually a tool. In fact, it's a tool for freighting. And a lot of people presume it was just for us to transport ourselves around the plains and by ox cart. No, it had a economic use to it. It was a tool. So you had big wheels, so you could go across a valley or a riverbed pretty quickly. And then also you would put the wheels inside, float it just like a raft. You could also tie them together. So with shagging appy, which is like wet rawhide, they would tie those carts together, move them just like a train, and they would be full of hides or economic goods that you traded with, that type of thing, right? So they had a real use to them. And then of course, there's even stories about buffalo hunt, them being used in that because they're so easy to get going on the plains. That's why we always look at chuck wagons as our sport, because we kind of are, not only there's a lot of Métis drivers out there, we actually look at that as like, hey, that's ours, right? Like, they're driving carts.
Yeah.
But Red River cart definitely had a use for it. It was invented by Alexander Henry, which is always a debate, whether he took the idea from his Métis workers. They actually designed it. He just took the credit for it, right?
Yeah.
But it was like early 1800s, I think, when that Red River cart was invented. But yeah, it was invented as a tool, and if there was no metal on them, because that was really important. So they squeaked a lot. And anybody who knows our last podcast called Squeaky Wheel,
Yeah.
because they could hear that wheel squeaking for miles and miles around, and people would complain about the Métis on the plains.
Wow.
Because the one reason they didn't use metal, because metal accumulated dirt, and with any metal you would have to use grease, and that just accumulated dirt. So it was just wood on wood, those wheels, and they would just rotate. And if something broke, you just went out in the bush, made another part, put it back on, and you kept going.
Yeah,
Right.
that works.
Yeah.
And you said the hide was called shagging appy.
It's the raw hide. So they would make a long, like a rope, but of the how you say? Yeah, it was rawhide. It was just like a deer would have that.
And that's like
The skin.
our road, like Shagging Appy Trail.
Yeah, that certainly is a word that came from the Métis, because Shagging Appy Trail, right at the top of it where the golf course is, was the first settlement from that first dispersal that I spoke about in 1870.
Yeah.
When the Métis fled. I think there was about 400 families living at Shagging Appy Point,
Oh, wow.
and they brought that word here. And what it is, Shagging Appy is actually a Cree word, and we're in Blackfoot territory, but it's that rawhide that they would use to tie around the tires for tread, or tie things together, all these carts, and make it more squeakier. But they had a use for the Shagging Appy, right?
Yeah, no, that's neat. We have all these names for our streets and
Mhm.
roads, and it's cool learning where they come from. But yeah, the cart must have been very important because it has a lot of significance today still.
Oh, yeah.
It's in different emblems and
Yeah, it means our symbolism. It's like what it tells people and tells our people is that, hey, we've been working the land long before Canada even existed, and here's an example, or here's the proof, right?
Yeah.
It's these Red River carts. They weren't just like a vehicle you just hop in with your family. There was just some use to them. Yeah.
they could be as well.
Yeah.
That is my last question I have.
Oh wow! So there isn't any more. The Métis Nation is so important to know history, to know where we come from. It's a way for us to move ahead, right? And I know this nation is growing like, exponentially. We're the fastest growing population in Canada, Indigenous population. I mean, and the reasoning is because a lot of our families are finally finding out who they are. So as Métis people, we have to pass this knowledge on them so they understand what a sash is, what a card is, what pemmican is, how did we share the buffalo with the First Nations? Like all these things, we have to understand it. When we relied on the forts to take care of us, we fought against that. And when Canada moved in and they said, well, we'll take care of you, we fought against that. Right? And I think we've been fighting, and fighting is in our DNA.
Yeah.
Like we're always fighting just to be acknowledged, to be known, to be seen, right? And I try to do my best to when I work with companies, to say to them that we're a little bit different than First Nations. I mean, it's all right to have those agreements and those relationships because that's meaningful, but where's the Métis meaningful relationship? And the only one way to get it is to probably sit in a meeting with me and hear what I just did for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's one way.
Definitely a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
But quickly, what is pemmican, since you just brought it up?
Well, pemmican is something that you could bury for months and still eat. Number one.
Sounds good.
It's like an energy bar, but the old style. But it had meat, it had all the berries you need, dried fruit. It was quite the invention during the fur trade. And then they would sell it at the fur trade forts. So you would buy a coat and then you would buy pemmican because that was a good resource for you. Because not like you're going out and shoot a deer every day, but you can eat pemmican every day.
Yeah.
Right?
You'll have to make some for us to try.
Yeah. But there's actually, they made bags, like pemmican bags.
Yeah.
Right? Moss bags or whatever they're called. And they would store their pemmican in there, so you would just stop wherever you were and have like an energy bar and stick it back.
Wow.
They actually make pemmican today. I haven't tried it like too much, but because it's like lard and grease and meat and berries and.
I think the viewers would enjoy watching you eat some next
Yeah,
podcast.
that. Yeah. But no, I mean back then definitely it actually was nutritious, number one. Like
Yeah.
you could survive just on pemmican alone out in the wilderness.
That's cool.
Yeah, but then of course the fur trade, the fur trading companies tried to limit the supply of pemmican to Métis people, and then Métis people, they said you can't sell it, and then that caused a big uprising, and then 1816 happened, and Métis were just fed up, said we are not working for these companies anymore, we are free men, and they started making their own demands.
Yeah, that's good. That is good.
Yeah, so I think that's it for me. Devin, I like these question and answer periods. I think they're great. And I hope somebody learned. But what I want you guys to do is hit subscribe. We want to build our viewership even further. And listen on Spotify, on iTunes. If you're out there working out and you want to listen to some Métis-ness, right? But I want to thank you guys for coming, and we look forward to our guests next week. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta.